No drove sideways across the glass face of the Ashford Tower on Bay Street, and 52 floors above the city. Vivian Ashford had not moved her legs in 17 years. The compression suit hugged her body from the rib cage down, matte black, clinical, threaded with thin tubes that pulsed faintly every 40 seconds like something breathing. Across the marble lobby of her private suite, a man in a gray coverall pushed a floor buffer in slow passes under the emergency lights. Donovan Sinclair worked the way men work, who have stopped expecting anything from the hours, except that they end. His hands were scarred across every knuckle. The left one carried a pale weld burn from the Hibernia platform that had never fully faded. He was 39 years old. He had a daughter who drew horses on the backs of grocery receipts. He had a name tag that read Sinclair, stitched in white thread above his chest pocket, and he had spent 9 years cutting and joining pipe at pressures that would crush a sedan flat, which meant he understood distribution systems the way a pianist understands a keyboard, not by theory but by feel, by the memory in his hands of what happens when force moves through a closed network and meets a point it was never meant to meet. He was not looking at Vivian Ashford. He was looking at the suit. The compression garment was supposed to manage lymphatic drainage. He had heard the attending therapist explain it to a nurse that first week on the night rotation, a slim woman in surgical blues, adjusting a valve, adjusting near Vivian's hip with the disinterested precision of someone calibrating equipment. Medical-grade pressure therapy, graduated compression, millimeters of mercury. The words had floated past him like radio static, but the suit was not graduated. He could see that from across the room. He had spent 9 years reading the geometry of pressurized systems, and what he saw in the layout of those tubes was not a drainage circuit. The pressure lines converged at points, since low on her spine, lumbar region, funneling force inward, instead of distributing it outward. A pipeline built that way would fail within a week. A body built that way would do something worse. He should have said nothing. He had a daughter at home. He had a lease 3 weeks past due. He had a name on a cleaning roster that could disappear between shifts. He set the buffer to idle. "Ma'am, that suit's running the wrong direction." The therapist's hands stopped mid-adjustment. Vivian turned her head the way a woman turns who has been interrupted 10,000 times by people who did not earn the right. Her gaze found his boots first, then the coverall, then the stitching on the pocket. "Excuse me, the pressure lines." His voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "They're converging at your lower back instead of dispersing outward. I've worked pipeline systems for almost a decade. When you funnel force into a single junction in a closed system, you don't relieve pressure. You create it. Whatever that suit's doing to your spine, it's not drainage." The silence that followed was the kind that makes a man aware of his own breathing. Vivian's mouth thinned. 17 years of specialists, of pitying hands, of men who thought they understood her body better than she did, had taught her to recognize presumption and extinguish it without hesitation. "And your medical credentials, Mr. Sinclair?" "I don't have any." "Then I'll continue trusting the team that does." Her hand moved to the intercom on the armrest of her chair. "Lawrence, could you come up when you have a moment?" He arrived in under 3 minutes. Donovan noted this. A man does not arrive on the 52nd floor in under 3 minutes unless he lives in the building or never truly leaves it. Dr. Lawrence Kessler stepped from the private lift in a navy suit, so precisely tailored it looked like it had been grown onto his frame, silver at the temples. A face arranged into a permanent expression of clinical patience. He surveyed the room, the therapist, the janitor, the rigid set of Vivienne's jaw, and produced a smile so practiced it could have been patented. "What's the trouble? This gentleman believes my compression suit is incorrectly designed." Kessler turned to Donovan. He looked at him for a long moment, and Donovan understood he was not being seen as a person. He was being assessed as a variable, a thread that either tucked back in or needed cutting. "Mr." A glance at the coverall. "Sinclair. The suit is a proprietary therapeutic device. Micro-pressure matrix, custom-fitted. Mrs. Ashford's case involves a very specific and delicate spinal pathology. I appreciate the concern." The smile widened by a millimeter. "I'm sure your work with pipes is excellent. Shall we let you get back to it?" Donovan said nothing. He picked up the buffer cord, wound it around the handle, and pushed the machine toward the service elevator. He felt Kessler's eyes on the back of his neck the entire way. The doors closed. The feeling did not. 17 years before, on a stretch of the Trans-Canada west of Sudbury, a liaison truck had jumped the median in a November ice storm and met Vivienne Ashford's sedan on the driver's side. She had been 23. She had been driving home from her first board meeting at Ashford Biosciences, the company. Her father, Gordon Ashford, had built from a single laboratory in Mississauga into the largest independent pharmaceutical manufacturer east of the Rockies. He woke in a ward at Sunnybrook 9 days later, with legs that would not answer, and her father, sitting beside the bed, holding her hand with both of his, weeping in a way she had never seen him weep and never would again. Gordon Ashford died of heart failure 14 months later. The cardiologist said it was congenital. Everyone else said it was grief. On his last afternoon, he took Vivienne's hand and pressed it into the hand of the young physician he had mentored since residency. The man he had paid through medical school, brought into the companies at 26, trusted with every clinical decision for a decade. "Lawrence will look after you," he had said. He set it down. "Lawrence is the only honest man I know." And then the light behind his eyes had gone out. Kessler had been 28. He grew into his role the way ivy grows into a wall. Slowly, patiently, until the structure beneath was no longer visible without him. He filtered every specialist who approached Vivienne, screened every second opinion, sat in on every consultation. He set it down, and whenever a new name surfaced, a neurologist from Western, a surgeon at McGill, publishing new decompression protocols, Kessler would appear at her side with the same gentle expression and the same gentle words. "Vivi, false hope is the cruelest medicine there is. These people see your name, they see the company. They will sell you a miracle and leave you worse than they found you." She had heard it so many times, in so many quiet rooms, that she had stopped questioning it. She had stopped questioning anything. Now she sat in her penthouse and tried to remember the last time a stranger had told her something about her own body that did not sound rehearsed. She could not. 52 floors below, in the executive wing, the company kept locked. After 7, Kessler stood at his office window and watched the snow. On the desk behind him lay a leather portfolio embossed with 2 logos, the silver caduceus of Ashford Biosciences, and, beside it, the blue helix of Geneval Therapeutics, Zurich. The acquisition papers had arrived by courier that morning. $8 billion. The largest pharma consolidation in Canadian history. 5 weeks to close. He set it down. He turned to the clause he had memorized 18 years ago. Gordon Ashford, in his boundless trust, had written it into the corporate charter as a safeguard. All material corporate decisions required the signature of the controlling Ashford heir. Unless a duly appointed medical board certified that heir unfit to govern, in which case authority devolved to the chief medical officer. The clause had been designed as a parachute. Kessler had spent 17 years turning it into a cockpit. He closed the binder. He did not need to read it. He had read it every morning for the last decade. The intercom chimed. "Sir, the night janitor on 52. What about him?" He made a comment about the compression unit. Mrs. Ashford seemed unsettled. Kessler considered. A janitor asking questions was a small stone. A janitor who suddenly vanished was a ripple someone might one day trace. He had not survived 17 years by creating ripples. Leave him on roster. Log his schedule. Floors and hours. That's all. Donovan came back the following week, and the week after that. On the third week, Vivian was in her study at 11 at night, alone, and she did not order him out. He cleaned around her, emptied the bin, wiped the glass, did not speak. On the fourth night, she looked up from her screen. "You said the lines converge at the lumbar." He set down the cloth. "I did." "Explain it to me as if I weld pipe for a living." He almost smiled. "A compression garment for drainage should push fluid outward, toward the heart. Yours does the opposite. The tubes narrow and converge at 2 points on your lower spine. If I saw that layout on a subsea pipeline, I'd shut it down and call the engineer. Because it means someone built a system that creates a pressure point instead of relieving one. And the reservoir packs where the lines meet, they're not removing anything. They're delivering something." She watched him for a long time. She did not invite him to sit. She did not need to. He went back to his cloth. Over the following weeks, somewhere in the quiet hours between 11 and 1, he began to tell her things. Not because she asked. Because a stranger does not require performance. He told her about Juno. About the way her laugh had sounded in the stairwell of their first apartment on Dundas. About the morning the headache started. And the months that followed. And the oncologist at Princess Margaret who had fought the insurance company for an experimental protocol. A woman named Dr. Rona Achebe, whose medical license had been suspended 11 months later, mailed billing irregularities that smelled, to anyone paying attention, like retaliation. Last he had heard, Achebe was running a physiotherapy clinic out of a rented storefront in Kensington Market, treating walk-ins for whatever they could pay. He told her about Maisie, 7 years old, an autoimmune condition with a name longer than her arm. The specific biologic her rheumatologist had recommended. The denial letters from Dominion Health Partners, one after another. The same sentence stamped across each. Treatment does not meet criteria for medical necessity under current formulary guidelines. He did not tell her because he did not know that Dominion Health Partners was a wholly owned subsidiary of Ashford Biosciences. He did not tell her because he did not know that the algorithm printing the word Denonid on his daughter's file had been approved 3 years earlier. 6 floors below them. Vivian listened, and for the first time in 17 years, she found herself thinking not about her empire, not about her body, but about a man with welding scars who had looked at her and seen something 16 specialists had not. The schematic was on the desk by accident. A Tuesday night. midnight. Executive floor 48. Donovan was emptying the recycling bin in the Smalls conference room when his hands brushed a portfolio left open, brushed beside a cold mug of coffee. He should not have looked. He looked. The top sheet was a technical diagram. Compression suit, lateral cross-section, dimensions in millimeters. Manufacturer's stamp. Hargrove Biomedical, registered in Charlottetown, a PEI. The drawing showed exactly what he had seen on the woman 52 floors above. Reinforced pressure channels converging at L4, L5, and at the junction points, 6 small rectangular reservoir packs, labeled in clinical shorthand. He did not need a medical degree to translate. Active compound matrix, continuous transdermal delivery, replace at 28-day intervals. Active delivery of what? He stood with the page in his hand for a long time, thought about Juno. He thought about the denial letters. He thought about a man in a Navy suit who arrived in under 3 minutes and spoke in the voice of a father who was not one. He folded the page twice. He slid it inside his coverall against his ribs. He went back to his cart. She was in her study the next night. She was alone. He laid the page on her desk. She read it. Her face did not change. Her face had not changed in 17 years, but her hand moved to the edge of the paper and held it there as though it might blow away. Where? Conference room. 48. On a desk. She did not look up. Mr. Sinclair, I need you to leave. He left. He was halfway across the lobby when 2 security men intercepted him. Polite. Expressionless. One held out a hand. Donovan gave him the key card. The other carried a small cardboard box. His lunchbox, his spare gloves. A photograph of Maisie he kept taped inside his locker. They walked him into the snow on Bay Street. Without a word, he set it down. He stood under the awning of a noodle shop and looked up at the 52nd floor until the cold forced him to move. She did not sleep. She sat in her chair and watched the snow and thought about the schematic and about Kessler's voice and about her father. The suit pulsed against her spine the way it always had. That she had stopped noticing years ago. At 3 in the morning, she rolled herself into the bathroom and locked the door. She had never undressed without help. The therapists did it. The night aide did it. For 17 years, no hands but theirs had touched the seals of the compression suit. Her fingers shook. The first seal cracked open with a soft hiss, then the second. When the front panel of the suit split apart against her ribs, she sat staring at her own skin in the bathroom light. The reservoir packs were exactly where the schematic said they would be. 6 of them. The size of postage stamps, beige, nearly invisible against her skin. She peeled the corner of one with her thumbnail. The cold was immediate. It bloomed outward from the patch in a slow chemical wave, climbing her ribs, sliding past her hip, past the border where feeling was supposed to end, down into the dead country of her thigh, her knee, the sole of her foot. Not warmth, not sensation. The absence of an absence, a numbness lifting off skin that had been numb so long. She had forgotten there was anything underneath. She pressed the patch back down. Her hand was shaking. A memory surfaced then, one she had not visited in 16 years. Her father in his hospital bed at Mount Sinai, the morphine drip in his arm, the small brass key on a chain around his neck. He had taken it off and pressed it into her palm. Sweetheart. Lawrence office safe, behind the Rayopel. Don't open it unless there's no other door. She had thought he was confused. She had taken the key home, placed it in a velvet pouch in her vanity, and forgotten it. She rolled across the carpet now, opened the drawer. The pouch was there. The key was inside. She moved the next morning. She told Kessler she wanted a full walkthrough of the Geneval integration plan. Every schedule, every regulatory contingency. He smiled and agreed, and escorted her to the boardroom himself. At 9:15, the door closed. At 9:16, she sent a text to the only person in the building she trusted without reservation. Constance Beaulieu had served Gordon Ashford before she had served Vivienne. The text was 4 words and a photograph of a key. Lawrence office, Riopel. Now, at 10:10, while Kessler was deep in third-quarter capital projections, Constance walked into Vivienne's private study with a canvas tote bag and set 3 folders on the sick. Vivienne returned at noon. She opened the first folder. Hargrove Biomedical, Incorporated in Charlottetown, PEI, 2009. Sole director and beneficial owner, Lawrence M. Kessler. Patent filings for a Class 3 compression therapy device, the suit she had worn against her body for 16 years. Annual royalties listed in the filings, $9.4 million. She opened the second. Trial logs. A compound designation, a long alphanumeric string. Synthesis notes, that is, animal studies. The molecule was a synthetic neuropreparatant, engineered for one purpose: induced sustained reversible paralysis of the lower lumbar nerve roots, delivered transdermally at controlled dosage. There was a column labeled Human Subject. The column had a single entry, VA23 PT, her initials, her age at the time, post-traumatic. She read her own designation 4 times before her hands stopped shaking. She opened the third. The letterhead was Toronto Western Hospital. The date was June 2008. The author was a name she had heard once, years ago, on a list Kessler had gently dismissed. Patient Vivienne Ashford, age 24, presents with paraplegia secondary to motor vehicle accident. November 2006. MRI review confirms incomplete cord injury at L4-L5 with significant residual axonal continuity. Surgical decompression with anticipated meaningful motor recovery is strongly recommended within an 18-month window. The accident had been temporary. She had always been able to walk. And the man her father had handed her to had spent every year since refining the chemistry that kept her in her chair. She set the folder down. She looked at her hands as they belonged to a stranger. Everything in this room belonged to a stranger. She did not weep. She could not remember how. She picked up the third folder and read it again from the beginning, and she understood with the precision of a woman who began pharmaceutical years, who had governed a pharmaceutical company for 17 years, exactly what kind of man had been governing her. That night she tore the suit off. She did it on the bedroom floor because the bed had sensors woven into the frame. She knew that now. Everything had sensors now. She lay on the rug and peeled the patches off. One by one, the chemical tide that had touched her thigh the night before returned as a flood. Every nerve silenced for 17 years. Waking at once, screaming into a body that had forgotten how to hear them. Pins. Fire. Ice. The sensation of falling through her own legs from a height that had no bottom. She bit down on the cuff of her sleeve and made no sound, because she did not know who in the building was Kessler's and who was not. The only advantage she had was that he did not know she knew. She could not call her medical team. They were his. She could not call the police. Not yet. She had folders and patches and a story that sounded, on first hearing, like the paranoid episode of a wealthy invalid. She could not stand. She could barely breathe through the fire in her hips. She lay on the carpet and watched the ceiling, and outside the great window, the snow thickened over the city. 52 floors down, in his office on the executive level, Kessler was watching a screen. The screen showed 6 green vital sign traces streaming in real time from sensors woven into the compression suit. Heart rate, respiration, skin temperature, 3 independent dermal contact readings at the reservoir sites. For 16 years, the contact lines had been unbroken green. Tonight, all 6 went red. He sat very still. He looked at the calendar. 5 weeks to close. 5 weeks to $8 billion. 5 weeks to the corner office with his name on the door. The empire, Gordon Ashford, had promised him in everything but the will. He had planned for this. He had always planned for this. He picked up the phone. The number was one he had memorized years ago, held in reserve against an emergency he had prayed would never come. Outside, the wind shifted. The streetlights along Bay Street flickered once, twice, and then, in a long rolling wave from Union Station to Bloor, the grid went dark. He smiled, the faint private smile of a man whose luck has saved him the cost of manufacturing his own. Tonight, he said into the phone, she's alone. No power. Make it look like a fall. The outage map on Donovan's phone bloomed red. He had been sitting on the couch with Maisie asleep against his side, her head heavy on his ribs, a coloring book open across her knees. Outside, the wind had been climbing for an hour against the windows of the 2-bedroom on Gerrard. Their block still had power. The east grid off Parliament always held. But Donovan checked the outage map the way a sailor checks the sky. Out of habit, out of a vigilance he could not turn off. Bay Street corridor, solid red, not flickering, not partial, solid. In 11 years of working nights downtown, the grid across the financial district had never gone fully dark. Not in any storm, not in any heat wave. He looked at the screen. He looked at the snow falling past the street lamp. Something cold turned over in his chest. He carried Maisie across the hall. Mrs. Korchenko opened the door in her housecoat and asked no questions. She had raised 3 children alone and recognized a father, leaving in a hurry at midnight. Donovan kissed his daughter's forehead. Maisie did not wake. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The gardener was a white tunnel. His wipers fought the snow and lost. He drove with both hands and a jaw set like rebar. When he reached the loading dock on the east side of Ashford Tower, the security gate was dead in its frame, the keypad dark. He left the truck in the dock and went in on foot. The lobby was pitch black. His old key card was in a box on some security desk, but he did not need a card to find a stairwell. 52 floors. Emergency lights dead with the rest. He climbed in total dark, one hand on the rail, breath ragged by the 20th landing. Thighs burning by the 30th. He did not stop. Juno had taught him, in her last months, what it cost to stop. He thought about Juno, climbing the 3 steps onto their porch the week before she died, refusing his arm, refusing the rail, climbing on her own, because she had decided she would. At the 52nd landing, he leaned against the steel door and listened. Boots. 2 sets. Maybe 3. Already inside. He had a pry bar from the bed of the truck, the same one he had used 1,000 times, to lever open crating on the Hibernia rig. He fit the curve of it into the seam of the service door and set his shoulder. It opened. The penthouse, The way a man opens a thing that is not meant to be opened. She was on the bedroom floor. The men in the corridor had not found her. The men in the corridor had not found her. The layout was complex, the dark was total, and they had been told to look for a woman in a chair. They were looking in the chair. Donovan crossed the carpet on his knees, found her hand by touch, pressed his palm over her mouth before she could make a sound, and she did not make one, because the instant her fingers closed, around his wrist she knew the wrist. Scarred knuckles. Weld burn on the left hand. The hand of a man who understood what happens when pressure meets a point it was never meant to meet. He lifted her. She weighed less than he expected. He set it down. He carried her down the service corridor, through the kitchen, past the laundry, into the narrow back stairwell the night staff used. The one no man in a tailored suit had ever committed to memory. 52 floors down in the dark. Halfway, she began to shake, not from cold, from the chemical fire still moving through her legs. He stopped on a landing and held her against his chest until it passed. Then they kept going. The clinic sat behind a painted door, on a side street off Augusta in Kensington Market. A hand-lettered sign read "Pisapi" in letters that had once been blue. Inside, the air smelled of rubbing alcohol and old radiators, and a woman in her late 50s, with close-cropped, gray hair and forearms that still remembered. Surgery was sitting at a desk at 3 in the morning reading a journal, because sleep had not come easily to Rona Achebe in the 7 years since she had lost her license. She looked up when the side door opened. She looked at the woman in Donovan's arms, as she looked at Donovan's face. She set the journal down without a word. Rona Achebe had not practiced medicine in 7 years. Not officially. The night the College of Physicians and Surgeons had revoked her credentials, she had walked to her car, driven to a storage unit in Scarborough, and pulled out the physiotherapy table her mother had used in her own practice 40 years ago. She told herself she was done with medicine. She told herself that for 7 years, and then a man, whose wife she had failed to save, walked through her door, carrying a billionaire who could not feel her own legs, and the lie she had been telling herself collapsed like a wall with the last brick pulled. "Table in the back room," Rona said. "Green case, bottom shelf. The one with the red cross." The detoxification took 6 weeks. It took 6 weeks because Rona would not let it take fewer. She set up an IV stand, improvised from a coat rack and a clamp. She titrated a chelation drip from a textbook she had not opened since her residency at Sunnybrook, and she ran it slower than a hospital would, because a hospital moved a patient toward discharge, and Rona was moving a patient back toward a body. The neuroprecursant had woven itself into the myelin sheath of every nerve below the waist for 16 years. It did not come out clean. It came out the way salt comes out of old timber, grain by grain, with patience and heat and a great deal of pain. The first week Vivienne could not sit up. Second week she could sit up. The second week she could sit up, and she could move the toes of her left foot. The first time those toes curled against the wool blanket Donovan had brought from home, she made a sound that was not laughter and not anything else a word could hold. Rona wrote it down in a notebook she had started keeping for the first time in 7 years. The third week Donovan began to build. He welded a pair of parallel bars from 2-inch steel pipe, salvaged from a demolition bin behind a condo project on Queen West, set them at the height of her hips, padded the rails with strips cut from a moving blanket. The first time Vivienne put weight on her own legs. She lasted 3 seconds before her knees buckled and she collapsed into Donovan's arms with a sound torn from somewhere 17 years deep. Second time, 5 seconds. The third, 9. There was no miracle in it. There was a woman who had been sitting for 17 years teaching her body to remember what it had been chemically forced to forget. And there was a man with scarred hands standing at the end of the bars with his arms open. And there was an old doctor watching from a folding chair with a notebook on her knee. And there was the smell of rubbing alcohol. And there was time. Maisie came after school, dictator. She did her homework on an upturned milk crate near the treatment table. She did not ask questions about the woman with the slow, careful legs and the dark hair pinned back from her face. She had been raised in a home, where adults were sometimes sick, and there were sometimes things you did not ask about. And she had absorbed that silence early. In the 4th week, she brought Vivienne a drawing. She had done it in colored pencil on the back of a spelling test. It showed a woman standing upright, one hand on a railing, and beside her, a wheelchair drawn empty, its wheels at a slight angle as if she had just risen from it. Across the top, in the careful uneven letters of a child who had practiced her printing, that morning, she had written, "You got up." She held it out with both hands. Vivienne took it. "My mom used a wheelchair too," Maisie said, at the end. "She told me once that getting up wasn't the hard part," she said. "The hard part was believing you were going to." The thing that broke in Vivienne Ashford had been holding for 17 years. When it broke silently, her shoulders folded over the drawing in her lap, and the tears that came were not the tears of a woman crying about what was in front of her. They were the tears of a woman. They were the tears of a woman who had not cried in a very long time and was now crying for the whole length of it at once. Maisie put her small hand on Vivienne's wrist and did not move it. Donovan stood at the workbench with his back to them and did not turn around. That night, after Maisie had gone to sleep at Mrs. Korchenko's, and Rona had folded herself onto the cot in the back office, Vivienne opened the manila folder. "Nay, same," Donovan carried in his coat pocket everywhere he went. She had asked to see it that morning. She had not been able to look at it then. Maisie Sinclair, date of birth, diagnosis, the long autoimmune name Vivienne had heard 1,000 times in product meetings. The recommended biologic protocol. The denial letter from Dominion Health Partners, 14 months old. A second denial. A third. The same sentence on each, generated by the same engine. Treatment does not meet criteria for medical necessity per standard utilization review. She knew the engine. She remembered the meeting. 2022. Summer, the small conference room on 46. Kessler had walked her through the slide deck himself. Formulary optimization through automated prior authorization. 84% denial rate on initial submission. The cost savings are remarkable, Vivi. You sign this, and we protect the company's margins for a decade. She had signed it. She had signed it because her own chief medical officer had recommended it, and because her own chief medical officer had never lied to her. That had been the phrase she carried for 17 years. "Lawrence is the only honest man I know." She sat in the back room of a Kensington Market clinic with the folder open on her knees and understood finally, and without comfort, that she had not been the only person Lawrence Kessler had damaged. She had been his instrument. The denial stamp on this child's file had passed through a system bearing her own name. The girl sleeping across the hall in a neighbor's apartment, clutching a coloring book. The daughter of a man who had climbed 52 flights of stairs in pitch dark to carry a stranger to safety. Vivienne had failed her before they had ever met. She closed the folder. She did not cry again. There would be time for that. Right now, there was something else to do. The board, he set it down. The board of Ashford Biosciences convened at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning in the 17th floor boardroom of the Bay Street Tower. Lawrence Kessler sat at the head of the table in charcoal wool. The Geneval delegation sat to his right. 4 men in Zurich tailoring with 2 unsigned copies of an $8 billion acquisition spread on the walnut. The medical certification of Vivienne Ashford's incapacity to lead. The document Kessler had assembled over 6 weeks from his own falsified records lay in a leather portfolio at his elbow. He was opening the meeting when the far door opened. She walked in on aluminum, forearm crutches. She walked in slowly, 5 steps from the door to the head of the table. The first step took her 8 seconds. The second was steadier. By the third, the room had gone silent enough that the only sound was the soft click of rubber on hardwood. By the fifth was the step that took her past Kessler's chair to the seat her father had built at the head of the table. Not a man in the room was breathing. 5 steps. 17 years. Donovan came in behind her in a navy blazer that had hung in his closet since the pipeline days and still fit at the shoulders. He placed a folder in front of each of the 12 board members. Hargrove Biomedical, Charlottetown. Compound Trial Logs. The Toronto Western Consultation of June 2008. Toxicology assays on the reservoir packs removed from Vivienne's body in the bathroom of a 52nd floor penthouse 6 weeks earlier and frozen in a cooler in the back of Rona Achibe's clinic. Kessler's face did not move. His face had not moved in 17 years. The doors at both ends of the boardroom opened simultaneously. The officers at the main entrance wore RCMP windbreakers. The two at the service door were Toronto police. Kessler looked at the service door. The service door was where he tried to go. The service door was where they put the handcuffs on him. He did not speak as they led him out. He looked once at Vivienne. The way a man looks at a piece of equipment that has performed unexpectedly, and then he was gone. He turned to the board. She canceled the acquisition within the hour. He set it down. She ordered the immediate suspension of every automated denial algorithm at Dominion Health Partners, effective close of business, with manual reprocessing of every claim flagged in the preceding 36 months. The first file pulled from the queue for human review by her direct instruction belonged to a 7-year-old girl in a second-floor apartment on Gerrard Street. Spring came late to the beaches that year. The house Vivienne bought was a brick bungalow on a quiet street south of Queen, set back under 2 silver maples with wide south-facing windows, and a porch that ran the full width of the front, and a garden in back that ended at a low cedar fence. There was not a single step anywhere on the property. She had checked. Rona Achibe's medical license was restored in March. He was teaching emergency medicine seminars at U of T again, and had moved into a flat above a bookshop on Harvard Street. He came for dinner on Sundays. Donovan had taken the position Vivienne created for him at Ashford Biosciences, head of biomedical engineering, orthotics division. He and Maisie had moved into a house 4 blocks away, and Maisie had not had a flare in 8 months. On a Saturday afternoon in May, Vivienne sat on the porch with a wooden cane across her lap. The cane was birch. It was the only mobility aid she used now, and she used it less each week. In the yard, Donovan was chasing Maisie across the new grass. The girl ran in the wide, loose circles of a healthy 7-year-old, laughing the laugh of a child who had forgotten what it was to be sick. And Donovan ran behind her, with his arms wide and his head thrown back, and the late sun caught the leaves and threw the cut leaves of the maples and threw them gold across the lawn. She set the cane aside. She put her bare feet on the boards of the porch. The wood was warm. Beneath it the foundation, and beneath the foundation, and beneath the foundation, the earth. And after 17 years, for the first time, Vivienne Ashford felt the ground hold her.